It's Melissa Peters here with DORN Companies, coming to you pain-free live to help you live pain and injury-free. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Injury Prevention Academy, brought to you by DORN Companies, the country's leading wellness-based pain management and injury prevention company, committed to reducing costs of healthcare, workers' compensation, and lost productivity, resulting in over $100 million in savings over the last 20 years for our clients. Joining us today is Dave Jeary, who is the EHS Manager at Emerson Automation Solutions in Boulder, Colorado. Dave is an organizational safety leader and management professional with over 15 plus years of combined experience in evaluating risk, auditing workplace environments, analyzing incident data, and transforming safety practices, policies, and cultures within the manufacturing, government, and research and development sectors. He is recognized as a valued business partner, providing the strategic vision and tactical oversight in the development and implementation of targeted safety management systems, expertly training staff towards an overall culture of safety, and consistently monitoring for continuous and engaged improvement. So thank you, Dave, for taking time to join me today. How is it going over there?
It's going great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, that's great to hear. So Dave, as I prepared for this episode, I ran across a guide that you contributed to while you were with the city of Aurora on workers' safety and health in the marijuana industry. And as I'm sure most of us are aware, in the grand scheme of life, that is a very new infant industry that required a lot of planning from the ground up. So when starting from that base level, what are some major factors that need to be considered when developing a program for worker health and safety?
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into it, and it was a really great opportunity to be able to get involved with that. It's not every day you get the capability to kind of jump into a brand new industry like that, right? Most of the time we find ourselves kind of it's already existed, and we're kind of picking up the pieces. So it's really neat to be able to go in and be exposed to that from the very beginning. What do you look at? I think there's a lot, right? And it can almost be overwhelming at times, but understanding what the organization is doing, what are the risks associated with it, and then identifying the different levels of risk within the different operations, and starting with, you got to prioritize somewhere. So you might as well start there, right? And look at the high hazard things first, and then work your way through to lower hazard items as you kind of check things off the list. But really, it's understanding your work processes, the risk involved in the work processes, and then how do you go about starting to address it.
Gotcha. And so it comes, this was a new industry, and you mentioned a lot of times if it's an existing industry, you kind of piggyback off of what exists. When it came to developing from the ground up, were there major components that you could kind of draw from your experience and put in that are standard features?
Yeah, some of the stuff that like the group did was we toured a number of locations to start to get an understanding of what their processes were, what the procedures were, what the hazards are, where they had their arms around the hazards pretty well and where they didn't in different organizations. And were we seeing consistent things from one location to another, right?
Okay.
So that helped us kind of understand as an industry where they had a good understanding of the hazards versus not, right?
Gotcha.
And then also you end up looking at like just how does that relate back to risk too? And then there's compliance, and there's a lot of different elements, and you almost have to look at it from, not only there's the compliance piece of are you legal, but then there's also the prevention mentality, right? Because you can be compliant, maybe that just helps you not kill somebody, but someone can
Okay.
still get hurt, right? So how do you take it to the next level and make sure that you're really reducing the risk of injury as a whole rather than just being compliant with the law?
Understood. And so, looking at the idea of developing a plan around safety programs, whether new or existing, I know one factor that's always present, and that is budget. And I know you all recently at Emerson, I believe, went through your budget season. A lot of folks that I'm talking to are actively in planning and budget stages. So, when it comes to this ever important issue of budget, can you speak to how it is that you think about what variables are involved with budget, strategies that you use when making decisions about what to invest in safety wise? So, let's say you want to reduce your company's injury rate by 10% in the next 12 months. How do you address the budgeting, the internal discussions, and the process involved with that?
That's an interesting one. And it's oftentimes challenging, or at least it has been in my career, because there's a lack of a lot of black and white, right? Um, how do you show the value of something that didn't happen, which is ultimately what we're trying to do, right? Um, so that's a little bit of a challenge, but if you look at it a little bit differently, it's not that bad. So when we start talking about, say, we want to reduce our injury rate by 10%, what is it that's driving our injury rate for one, right? And then what are the ways that we can start to reduce that? So we'll look at a number of different things, and then you weigh the pros and cons of each one, and what value or what the anticipated outcome is going to be, and then try to attach some dollar signs to it to just cost justify or what the payback would be. Oftentimes, my experience has been is if you make the workplace safer, you get a better quality product and it's more efficient, right? And if we can make our people more efficient, they're usually happier, so that helps too, right?
Yeah.
So if you get it right, and and a lot of it is, you know, sometimes you get the pushback of we could do all these things and our numbers may not change, and that's true, right? Because maybe we fix this and we have a problem pop up over here, but at least we don't have this problem and that problem now, right? And so for me, a lot of times I will look at all the kind of standard metrics, right? We'll look at comp costs associated with the injuries. Are we seeing trends in a particular area, right? So say from my past experience, we had a site that one area of the plant was generating 2 times the injury frequency of all the rest of the areas of the plant. And so we focused on that. And then we dove deeper to see what the injuries were. And there were some pretty large factors that were kind of set in stone almost, right? At the site, they used automated guided vehicles and they delivered the product at a height. And it was a fortune to try to change the height of the conveyor that the automated guided vehicles would drop the materials off at, which happened to be too high for the population at the plant, right? So we had to get creative, and we did that a couple of ways. One, we don't want to hurt our people, right? So there's that whole kind of valuing the individual, and how do you assign a dollar value to that? I think it's almost impossible, right? But if we're hurting people, that's bad. But that doesn't always sell in the boardroom. So, but it's a good overlying message. I think the way to do it, and my experience, at least in my experience, what's been the most successful for me is to identify where the risk is currently, what are the costs and the impacts to the organization because of that risk, and then look at your different opportunities of improvement and what are the costs of implementation, what's the payback period on those, and then help folks make the right decision. And there's a
Yeah.
little bit of sales, a little bit of this, a little bit of psychology, but also the numbers are there to kind of back it up too. It can't just be because it's the right thing to do, unfortunately, although, you know, it's nice when it is. Um, and I wish we could all think that way all the time, but there's also the reality of budgets and finances and, all those things. So, what we try to do, or what I try to do, is identify where it's going to get us, what the benefits are. And if, I've been pretty fortunate with the organizations I've worked with are pretty proactive, um, in that they'll take a look at it. And if it is the right thing to do and we can figure out a way to do it, then they'll do it. You know,
Sounds
um,
good. And yeah,
yeah.
sounds like there's a standard kind of a process that you go through, and I'm sure it varies by organization. So I want to pick your brain a little bit. And so I know I've had some conversations, and COVID-19 has definitely made budgeting and planning for the future a little bit interesting. So have you guys found different strategies as you balance the budget for things related to COVID-19 response, maybe having to put in temperature checks and other things that might come out of the safety budget, and how you balance that with, maybe more traditional safety needs like injury prevention programs?
Yeah. We've been, again, I feel like I'm pretty fortunate, with the organization I'm currently with. We took a very proactive stance associated with that. And I think a lot of our leadership have looked at it as at least the COVID things that we've had to put in place, like temperature scanning, um, all the additional face coverings and PPE that we're wearing, the additional cleaning and fogging of the site, all those steps transitioning transitioning to like mostly remote work, and now transitioning to bringing people back to the office. We've really kind of taken the approach that it's kind of the cost of doing business in the world we live in today, right? Now that being said, we had to make some decisions based on risk to move contractors out, right? And a lot of third party folks that were here weren't here for a long time. We've seen some business impacts as well. So, as most of the world has, we're primarily, one of our biggest customers is oil and gas, and they're down, which means our sales are down. Um, so there's always challenges and pressure there, but what I can say is, when safety is a value of the organization, that doesn't get as impacted. There's always impacts, um, but at least we're thinking about safety, and we're not we don't short circuit the safety efforts because of that, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so what we've done is we purchased a number of IR cameras, and that didn't hit my budget. It was an operational budget, right? Those type things. So really kind of, we found the money to do what we needed to do, and then kind of proceeded from there.
Okay, so hearing you speak, it definitely sounds like Emerson has a true commitment to worker safety. And as you know, you're familiar with DORN and the work we do, and we take a total worker health, total employee health, holistic approach, and believe that it's important. So I believe you share the same kind of approach, that the importance of looking at the whole person is critical. And so, why are employee engagement and participation crucial when building a safety culture that's committed to that wellness, kind of approach? And how do you achieve employee buy-in to these safety programs?
Well, I think first thing you have to do is involve them, right? Because I guess I learned pretty early, and probably the hard way, you can't force it, right? Um, these people do their job every day, and if it's not going to help them, they're not going to do it. So you want to do things that are going to help them out, and hopefully it becomes a win-win for everybody, right? But in order to do that, you have to engage them, right? And so I guess that was the biggest thing I learned in my first couple of years as a safety person was working with the people because they know where the problem is 98% of the time. Um, Sometimes you got to filter some politics and stuff, but and not like governmental politics, just inner office politics. But you have to kind of you ferret through that, but to listen and understand what they're saying and what they're telling you, and then how do you help facilitate the change that's going to be beneficial for everybody is really where you get that buy-in, right? Including them, listening to them, and then including them in the solution is kind of the best way, in my opinion.
I'm with you there. I have a little bit of a background in social science research, and I was always a fan of what's called participatory action research because it's the idea that instead of you in your office or ivory tower making decisions for people who are out there doing the work, you go and you involve the people who you're trying to learn about because chances are they can tell you a lot more about their life than you can tell them by not engaging them. So I'm with you on the importance of including those who are actually the ones who are doing the work so that then you can advocate on their behalf, if I understood correctly.
Absolutely. And they know the job, right? Way better than I'm ever going to know it. And so, if I want to know something about something, I'll go ask the expert. And in this case, it's mostly them. So I go talk to them.
Excellent. So Emerson is, a mature company. It's been around for over 130 years and is one known for being successful and innovative. So, you've mentioned kind of your experience over time has changed. So, how do you introduce change and innovation in an area like safety, which, for lack of a better term, is not as sexy as maybe investing in new equipment or products?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think sometimes that investment in new equipment or product, if you get it right, you're also investing in safety, right? Um, it's also, um, I, I believe this is it's kind of the communicate, 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 and then when you think you've communicated enough, communicate some more because there's somebody that missed a communication. Um, and you can't underestimate that. I had a colleague that used to always say, what people don't know, they make up, and so give them the information they need to know so they don't have to make it up and come to their own conclusions a lot of times. We do a lot of we have all kinds of methods of communication, but it still sometimes feels like you don't communicate things enough, and it's always a challenge. But I think as you're improving and taking steps to improve safety, demonstrating not only the value of the change, but the why and who's been involved in the process. And if you involve the people that are doing the work, then they'll understand the why, right? And help
Okay.
that communication go too. So I think it's again it becomes a collaborative process across the organization. It's not just happening in a bubble. Um, Safety is one of those things that touches everything we do every
So
day.
speaking, yes, hearing just the word collaboration, sorry if I cut you off and definitely finish your
No,
thought, but when I hear collaboration, do you find yourself working across different segments of your company? So is safety kind of siloed, or have you worked to collaborate with like HR or legal or finance? You see inter-departmental collaboration as being a critical factor?
it totally is, right? So, um, at least my experience has been no one person can do it all, right? From an EHS standpoint, it takes the entire organization, and it gets back to that buy-in and ownership. It's not, safety isn't the safety person's only, or safety isn't only the safety person's job, it's everybody's job at the site, right? I find myself collaborating with people all day, every day. You know, it's seldom that I'm working on something that I'm not working with an ops manager or an engineering manager or engineers or maintenance or facilities, finance, um, senior leadership, all those things. It's one of the things I love about EHS is I get to work with everybody within the organization, um, and that makes it exciting.
Yes,
You
and
know?
definitely I think helps build a culture of safety. And I know for a lot of companies out there, it's not only the collaboration within their organization, but also bringing in outside vendors who provide particular services. So when you're engaging with a third party vendor, how do you integrate these outside vendors in your company culture? And kind of what factors are involved when you're evaluating what external vendors you want to bring in?
So one, anytime you're going to bring in a vendor, there's going to be a cost, right? And so, is there value that the vendor is going to bring to the location and the site? So that's something you look at. Two is the product or service that they're providing, um, a need, you know, and I think, and at least in our relationship with DORN is that we had a need to help care for our employees, right? Um, and provide an alternative to help them with aches and pains and things like that. And we've seen a lot of value in that. It's been super helpful for a lot of our people. I can't go out on the floor and not have them say, thank you for that. It helps, right? So, and that's great. And it tells me where the investment is worth it, right? How do the other things we do to evaluate, is the company a fit to the culture? Um, are we going to get the things that we need from it? But also, um, it can't just be one way, right? It's got to work for everybody. Do our employees appreciate it? Is there value for them? Those type things. So we kind of look at the kind of gamut, and is it the right fit, just like we would an employee, that we were going to
Okay,
hire with the right fit. So
gotcha. And so, speaking of vendors, last but not least, DORN included, we were impacted by COVID-19 as a lot of companies had to kind of push external vendors out as we all scrambled to even get some kind of grasp on whatever this new normal or reality is. So, I want to end by just speaking about some of the challenges that might have arisen when you work to balance the immediate needs related to COVID-19, similar to kind of what we touched on earlier, but also the need to protect your workers from injury or dealing with pain and discomfort related to their work that was handled by your third party providers, how you kind of work to maybe fill the gaps in the interim, and then also what the process has been like as you've worked to bring back those third party providers.
sure. So at the onset, right, when we kind of decided we were going to transition to a mostly remote based outside of critical personnel in the plant, um, we took the stance of really the only people that were here were the people that we needed to have here, um, whether that was a vendor or an Emerson employee, right? If you could do your job remotely, you were doing your job remotely. Um, and we really wanted to minimize the people on site to the folks that were that had to be here and were contributing to building our product, right? Because we wanted to protect that population as much as possible from um, the spread of the virus as much as we could. So one way to do that is you close it off. So we did that. And as we've slowly started to bring folks back, what we're looking at now is what are those third party providers, DORN, cafeteria, you know, some of the other service type things that are very nice to have that maybe we made a decision not to have for a while because the risk was so high. We feel like we've gotten our arms around a lot of the risk level now that we're slowly starting to bring those folks back. Like we have a gym on site too that's been closed since the start. And we're
Okay.
looking at what we need to do to be able to open our gym up, right? Everything from ionizers in the air handler to increase filter capacity, putting a HEPA in the space, regular cleaning, all those steps that we put in elsewhere in the facility. How do we kind of continue to extend that out to the other organizations as we bring folks back? And then
Gotcha.
bringing back those services too, because part of bringing folks back to the office, there's a little bit of a kind of almost, I don't call it a sales pitch, but why would somebody want to come back if none of the things that they had before the pandemic are allowed, and they're going to basically do WebExes from their office all day rather than WebExes from their living room,
Yeah.
right? I'd rather sit in my living room personally, but opening up the things that are kind of benefits to the employees as well on site is beneficial for them too. And as long as we're making a lot of efforts to be able to do that so that as long as we're not adding incremental risk in the process. So we're taking it slow, seeing how it goes and doing it step by step. And it's so far that's worked for us, right? We make these little incremental changes, make sure things are good, and then we make the next change and watch it for a little while, make sure things are good, and then we keep kind of progressing that way, and it seems to be working out pretty well.
It is interesting times that we're all getting through, but I think adaptation and communication and then reevaluation is kind of the rhythm of the time. So, do you guys come together as a team on a frequent basis and go through your preparedness plan and just check in?
Oh, absolutely. We well, from a pandemic standpoint, we have a couple different teams that are engaged in the process. We have a site specific team, and because we also have an executive level team, right? So the site team is focused on basically the entire site. The executive level looks at the whole division, and so we have folks in Boulder that are on both, and so we review our process right before. Actually, yearly we look at our crisis management plan and make sure it's valid and all the steps are in there. We had just completed that in February before we started March with COVID. And in fact, we were kind of already starting to deal with COVID because we're multinational. We have a plant in China, right? And so we were sourcing masks for the China plant in January, and trying to help them out. So we kind of were already having conversations around it at that point. And then in March, they just got way more intense and way more frequent. But it's been good, and it's been a great process. And I think at the end of this, we'll look back and say we were underprepared for a pandemic, just knowing what we know now today. And it was just because basically we had never gone through one before like that. You
Yeah,
know,
I don't think global pandemics come around too often. So,
thankfully, I will
uh,
add.
may we all rejoice in living through history together. So thank you so much, Dave, for taking time and sharing your valuable insight with me and with our listeners and viewers out there. And we appreciate all of you who took the time to listen or tune in today. Hope you gained something out of it, and hope you tune in for the next episode. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.